To avoid drawing attention, he didn't reveal himself to join the expedition team. Instead, he accelerated his search around the city. Soon, in an open area, he discovered the bodies of a small human expedition team. Jean Genia deduced from the lack of bite marks on the bodies and the fact that the equipment hadn't been stolen that the killer wasn't a group of predators. Because most predators that come out to hunt wouldn't leave bodies behind. It was likely a solitary, powerful species, and because of its presence, other predators, even if they smelled blood, wouldn't dare to come and gnaw on the bodies. It seemed this species should still be nearby. Just as this thought crossed Jean Genu's mind, a figure leaped from the side, swinging its claws, pouncing to kill him. To determine the cause of death, the man rummaged through the pile of bodies. He actually managed to find 2 strands of hair. At that moment, Jean Genius suddenly felt a gust of wind from behind his head. As he turned his head, his body instinctively moved half a step to the side, but the backpack on his back was torn by the claws. However, the danger wasn't over. The monster's speed was incredibly fast, and it pounced at him again. Jean Geniu quickly drew his sword to block the incoming claws. Seeing its attack fail, the monster suddenly flipped its other paw to kick, but Jean Geniu pushed off the ground with force, dodging just in time. It fell on the steps. By the time Kim Jin-woo turned to catch the little monster, it was too late. The thing had already escaped out the door with a few leaps. The brief exchange allowed Jean Geniu to clearly see the monster's appearance. He realized that the creature before him should be the werewolf the dealer mentioned. And judging from its claws, it was likely responsible for wiping out that expedition team. As he pondered, the werewolf pounced at him again. This time, Jean Geniu didn't dodge or evade. His sword effortlessly blocked the werewolf's strength. He realized the werewolf wasn't skilled in long-range attacks and was just relying on its speed advantage in battle. It felt like fighting a miniature version of Blood Rage. Its strength was just average, about the same as Kanian's, but it didn't look like a werewolf at all. It looked more like a tiger, and a female one at that. Seeing no point in continuing the fight, he swung his sword upward, forcing the tiger woman to hastily withdraw and dodge. This exposed a wide-open vulnerability, and he immediately landed a punch on her abdomen. The powerful force sent the tiger woman flying, slamming hard against the rock wall. He then sternly ordered the tiger woman to stop. Unexpectedly, his punch had triggered the ferocity in the tiger woman's blood, and she came at him again. Indeed, kind words are hard to persuade the wicked. Jean Geniu didn't hesitate either, immediately redirecting his energy to finish her off. Unexpectedly, with a gunshot, the tiger woman was instantly enveloped by a large net fired from the side. The sudden change left both of them stunned. By the time the tiger woman reacted, she was firmly bound by the capture net. No matter how she struggled, it was futile. She could only let out reluctant, low beast roars. It ran away quite fast, but considering these 2 velvet gemstones, he decided to let it go. Little did he know, the gemstone that fell on the steps was slowly rising. It turned out to be the expedition team they had encountered on the way that had intervened. The man who looked like the captain, ignoring Jean Genius' presence, directly signaled his teammates to hurry and take the tiger woman away. This unreasonable behavior made Jean Genius slightly irritated. He immediately spoke up to demand an explanation. This caught the captain off guard. It turned out they thought Jean Geniu was a survivor from the annihilated small team, and they had just intervened to save him. Hearing this explanation, Jean Geniu couldn't take advantage of the situation and was about to leave without a word. Little did he know that as he turned, his backpack, previously torn by the tiger woman, was continuously dropping gems. As the old saying goes, wealth moves people's hearts. This sight immediately stirred up wicked thoughts in the captain. He immediately called out to Jean Geniu, casually starting a conversation. While scratching his head, he signaled to the blonde guy behind him. The blonde guy immediately understood and began making arrangements. At the same time, he quietly activated his special ability, and his eyes lit up with a faint green glow. He also started a 4-second countdown. By now, the people arranged by the blonde guy were in position, ready to act in 3 seconds. When the countdown reached the last second, the teammate hiding behind swung his knife at Jean Geniu. At the same time, the blonde guy's eyes showed the scene of Jean Geniu being stabbed to death 1 second later. He felt relieved, letting his guard down. Unexpectedly, in the last 0.18 seconds, his vision showed Jean Geniu swinging his sword and killing his teammate. In an instant, the outer layer of the gemstone cracked. The secret room also began to shake. This disturbance gave Kim Jin-woo an ominous feeling. Indeed, before he could warn them, 2 sprays of blood appeared before his eyes. Seeing the plan exposed, the captain didn't immediately attack Jean Geniu. Instead, he turned and blamed the blonde guy's incompetence, not warning them of danger in advance. Clearly, the captain didn't take Jinju with his seemingly trash equipment seriously. Little did he know that the blonde guy was now extremely terrified because, through his ability to foresee 2 seconds into the future, he had already seen that Jinju would kill them in 1.3 seconds as he foresaw. After Jinju uncovered their plan to kill and rob, he became furious. In a flash, like a demon from the abyss, he launched a one-sided attack on them. The successive deaths of their teammates left the two, binding the werewolf frozen in fear. Their minds couldn't process it quickly, still debating whether to help or flee when their bodies were suddenly struck by a sharp object. Slamming them hard against the rock wall, this series of events also startled the tiger woman. She stared blankly at the scene of corpses strewn everywhere before her. Her gaze was shocked, but when their eyes met, she saw him gesture for her to come quickly. At this moment, an angry shout came from the side. It was the captain. He was now severely injured with one arm cut off. The excruciating pain made his mind race, and he suddenly understood everything. Standing on moral high ground, he began to condemn Jinju's despicable actions, accusing him of killing his own team to keep the gems and the tiger woman for himself. Fortunately, the ramhorn monsters soon fell to the ground and died due to its severe injuries. Only then did the bodyguards recover from their shock. They were still frightened, thinking how lucky it was that there was only one ramhorn monster and an injured one at that. Just its roar had already made them lose their resistance. He slowly turned to look behind him. The man was unexpectedly bitten by a snake on his arm and surprisingly inherited an ancient Garora clan secret room. Hearing this, Jinju was filled with rage, gripping his sword with both hands. This captain with a dark and filthy heart finally reaped what he had sown. On the other side, the remaining team members were scared and fleeing in panic. Jinju wouldn't let them escape. This group of villains instantly turned into a bolt of lightning, flashing past the blonde guy's eyes. At this moment in the blonde guy's vision, he had already seen the fate of these teammates 2 seconds later. This gave him a sense of sympathy for their shared fate. Realizing the vast difference in strength, he couldn't even muster the will to resist. Instead of resisting, he changed his ability's target to himself. He wanted to see how he would die 2 seconds later. Indeed, he saw the scene of himself falling headless 2 seconds later. In that moment of shock, Jinju's figure suddenly appeared. With one slash to his neck in the final moment of his life, he saw the level 12 badge on Jinju's arm. After this outburst, the violent aura around Jinju finally dissipated. He began to regret his broken backpack, causing gems to scatter and fall. Of course, he also noticed that the tiger woman behind him hadn't taken the opportunity to escape and was now slowly approaching him. Thus, he could freely traverse the underground maze filled with dangers and opportunities. This made him feel quite helpless. He shouldered his sword and turned to face her, but was startled upon turning around. The tiger woman's gaze and expression were full of admiration. Oh no, this situation seemed a bit off. The man killed people in the underground world. While walking on the street, he accidentally picked up a kagami. Little did he know that this seemingly harmless kagami would eat a whole dragon in one meal. His household was barely making ends meet, and he had picked up such a glutton. Recently, Domi had been worrying about the rapid consumption of food. It was because the Garo maze was developing too quickly. The meat and the pastures couldn't breed fast enough before being taken to the kitchen. If it weren't for Domi's foresight at the time, ordering the mages to freeze the flood into frozen meat, they might have had to relocate and adopt a nomadic lifestyle. Cunian suggested prioritizing food supply for the hornbearers. The Garo people could consume velvet gems to sustain themselves. This wasteful idea sounded good, but who knows if Jinju would hang him up for punishment when he returns. The yellow dragon nearby, hearing about eating gems, couldn't miss out on such a good deal. He immediately came over with a sycophantic face to sign up. Canyon, of course, knew his nature. He pushed him away because only some Ingaro people could absorb gems and convert them into energy. Now they had a plan to cut costs, but they still needed to quickly come up with a plan to increase resources. At this time, Lisa, who had been responsible for intelligence gathering, brought good news. She discovered that since the fall of the newspaper and giant dragon mazes, many fierce beasts had appeared in their territory. It was very suitable to fence off these two areas as hunting grounds. With this plan, the food problem for the next few months was solved. Today, a gemstone worth tens of millions accidentally fell. In an instant, it was about to be absorbed by the secret room. Other maze affairs were proceeding smoothly under Domi's supervision. Suddenly, Domi sensed that something had happened inside the maze. He immediately put down what he was doing and rushed into the maze. At the same time, they were chatting leisurely 1 second, and the next second, a pair of sharp claws attacked them. Just as they were about to be bloodied, a shout came from the side, forcibly stopping the tiger woman's actions. Jean Geniu seized the opportunity to set rules for the tiger woman, warning her that all creatures in the maze were under his protection. If hungry, ask Domi for food and not hunt the creatures in the maze. He also informed Domi at this time that this was a tiger woman picked up on the 7th floor named Tia. Unexpectedly, what surprised Domi was Tia's identity because he knew that beast people had always served the nobles in the deep underground and usually didn't leave the nobles' territory. How did she end up on the 7th floor? Moreover, from her dress and behavior, it was clear she hadn't served nobles before. Domi's words made Jean Genu think of the recent abnormal phenomena in the underground maze. For example, the wolf marquis, who should be on the 6th floor, appeared on the 2nd floor of the maze. Even fierce beasts like the hell spider from the 8th floor came to the 3rd floor to hunt. It seemed that some major changes must have occurred in the noble territories deep in the maze. Thinking of this, a sense of urgency arose in his heart to quickly develop and strengthen the Garrow maze to cope with possible wars. Kim Jin-woo suddenly turned his head. The control interface automatically popped up a prompt: consuming a medium-sized gemstone will repair and upgrade the maze's durability. He entrusted Tia to Domi's care, planning to return to the surface to settle some matters first, because after this, he would be staying in the underground maze for a long time. Back on the surface, he first completed the task with the merchant, then returned home to receive his adoptive parents' loving nagging for a whole day. For Domi, these days were extremely tormenting. This little troublemaker was too energetic, always either wrecking the house or on the way to wreck it. Time quickly passed another half-month. When Jean Genie returned to the maze again, he saw the despairing Huang in the corner. From his utterly hopeless expression, it was clear that life had lost all meaning. Domi also appeared behind him, disheveled and dirty all over. This made Jean Genu both troubled and speechless. It seemed the little one was living quite comfortably and had adapted well to life in the maze. To ease his master's embarrassment, Domi very deliberately changed the subject. The two came before the maze core that had already completed synchronization. After merging with the 7th-level core of the Dragon Maze, 2 new types of units were born. One was the 6th-level Garrow soldier with long-range assault capabilities. However, due to the level of the main core and smelting workshop not meeting the conditions, they couldn't be summoned yet. The other was the 7th-level siege beast that could be used as a mobile fortress. But the daily maintenance cost of the siege beast was too enormous. This big guy was not something the Garrow Maze, which was barely making ends meet, could afford to keep. For now, they could only look at it longingly. Finally, on Domi's suggestion, they summoned Garrow's scouts skilled in reconnaissance and hunting, as well as Garrow wizards who could buff teammates and cast spells to weaken enemy status. Seeing this situation, he immediately leaped towards the altar, grasping the gemstone in his hand, but it was too late. Then he authorized Domi to use the energy stored in the maze core. Next, he called for Lisa. The newly summoned scouts were assigned to Lisa's command. Cunian continued to be responsible for training soldiers and patrol work. As for the yellow dragon, he seemed to be good at babysitting, so he continued with that task. A month later, the Garrow Maze had undergone tremendous changes, thanks to the news of the Garrow Lord. Being in noble spreading, intelligent creatures no longer dared to approach the Garrow Maze's sphere of influence. Moreover, after a month of adjustment, Jean Geniu discovered that when problems arose, Domi and the other heroes could resolve them internally. There was no need for him to intervene, forcing him who wanted to do great things to become a hands-off boss again. Furthermore, under Lisa's command, the Hornbearer's love for digging was utilized to its fullest. They established an extensive network of tunnels underground centered around the Garrow Maze. Soldiers were arranged to take turns scouting and guarding. This meant that if enemies appeared, Jean Geniu could receive intelligence half a day in advance. On this day, Lisa anxiously knocked on Jean Genu's door. The gemstone's energy had already been absorbed by the altar, turning to ashes. The pop-up showed 24 hours to repair durability, 72 hours to complete maze upgrade. She reported that a team of about 30 people was approaching the Garrow Maze. Among them were 2 hero-level individuals. Domi, who also received the information, hurried over. After all, any force existing on the 9th floor of the maze would undoubtedly be formidable in terms of strength, but Jean Geniu was unconcerned about such a small group. With the current strength of the Garo maze, they could easily crush them, so he led everyone to set up a formation at the city gate. Soon, clouds of dust could be seen rising in the distance. Despite their small numbers, they were making quite a show. Upon closer inspection, the other party's equipment was indeed quite impressive. The two heroes at the front arrogantly shouted, demanding to see the Garo Lord. They introduced themselves as the Lords of Kixos, the Iron Hammer King, and the Iron Needle King. Jinjenu looked at them with indifference, seeing that the Garo maze members were unmoved. The Iron Hammer King became furious. He stepped forward, pointing his large hammer at Jinjenu, and shouted that those who didn't want to die should get out of the way. Though his voice was thunderous, his imposing manner was clearly lacking. As a short man standing out among chickens, he was very arrogant. He dared to hold his large hammer and shout challenges to duel this seemingly human man. Who would have thought that upon learning Jinjenu was the Garo Lord? The two heroes who were just boasting arrogantly immediately fell to their knees. Then, with an extremely respectful attitude and tone, they expressed their purpose. They had come to congratulate the Garo Lord on obtaining his noble title. His heart felt like it was being clawed at. That gemstone was worth millions with no choice. Jinjinu was skeptical of these two simpletons' explanation, who would bring a fully armed army to offer congratulations. Jinjeni's expression was naturally noticed by these two short but clever individuals. Iron Hammer, being quite perceptive, gave a signal to his subordinates behind him. Soon, two goblins, panting heavily, brought out a large chest. However, the contents of the chest immediately surprised Genius. Iron Hammer, supporting the chest, stated that on behalf of the Kixos monarch, they were presenting 500 velvet gems as a congratulatory gift. He also subtly explained that to ensure the safety of the gift, they had dispatched an elite team to escort it all the way into the Garo Maze territory, and not to intentionally offend the Garo Lord's dignity. As the saying goes, one doesn't strike a smiling face. At this point, Jinjenu finally lowered his guard towards them a little. The two pretended to be familiar and started making small talk, but Jinjenu's change in attitude made Iron Hammer seem to realize something. So he tentatively asked if they were the first maze to come and pay respects. This question stunned Jinjenu. Iron Needle, seeing Jinjenu's expression, knew his guess was correct. He immediately began his plan to sow discord, angrily denouncing the other maze forces for their despicable behavior of not coming to pay respects after learning that the Garo Lord had been elevated to nobility. Unexpectedly, his words immediately startled Jinjenu, making him realize that with the fall of the Dragon Maze, the Garo Maze had already attracted strong attention from various forces. Its location had also been exposed. At this point, Iron Hammer also noticed that his words seemed to have an effect on Jinjenu, so he began to educate Jinjenu about the situation of the major maze forces on this 9th floor of the underground. He sold the remaining red gemstone to a merchant for 18 million. 2 days later, his sister married her loved one with this generous dowry, blessed by their relatives. Before the Dragon Maze was destroyed, there were 6 major mazes on the 9th floor. They were the Bow, Lion Maze, Undead Maze, Swamp Maze, Dream Maze, Wanderer's Maze, and Goblin Maze. For a long time, the mazes have been keeping each other in check and balance. Among them, the Bow, Lion Maze, Undead Maze, and Dragon Maze were the 3 most powerful, forming a tripartite balance. As Iron Hammer spoke to this point, Jinjinu also realized that the rise of the Garo Maze had disrupted the balance of the 9 eternal world. Seeing this situation, Iron Hammer also revealed the true purpose of his visit at this time. It was that his monarch, Kixos, after learning of the Dragon Maze's destruction, predicted that the 9th floor would soon fall into a bloody battle. That's why he sent the 2 of them under the guise of congratulations to offer descendants, seeking protection from the Garo Maze. Hearing this, Jinjenu also raised his own doubts, since the Dragon Maze destruction had been some time ago. Why hadn't the Balestone Maze and Undead Maze made any moves yet? To this, Iron Hammer didn't conceal anything. In fact, the talk of a tripartite balance was just an assumption made by the Dragon Maze and Undead Maze. The Bowstone Maze wasn't actually interested in conquering territories. Their monarch thought every day about how to expand his own body. It was said that his body had become uncontrollably huge and possessed immeasurable power. After hearing Iron Hammer's account, Jinjinu felt overwhelmed. Because looking at the map, the Bowstone Maze was very close to the Garo Maze, and a battle seemed inevitable sooner or later. Now, after this understanding, Jinjinu had a general idea of the 9th floor world. Back home, Kim Jinwoo still couldn't get over the gemstone consumed by the maze. He could only hope this upgrade would be worth it. After asking Iron Hammer to convey his gratitude to the Kikso's monarch, he invited Iron Hammer and his group to rest inside the maze. However, Iron Hammer was unwilling to stay long. The reason was that other mazes might come to visit the Garrow maze soon, and to avoid conflicts, they decided to return immediately. Seeing this, Jinjenu didn't insist and instructed Cunian to escort them for a while, so Cunian led a group of people to see off Iron Hammer and his party. After they left, Jinjinu asked Lisa to verify if Iron Hammer's words were true. After all, he had been a mercenary in the 9th floor for many years. After getting Lisa's confirmation, he immediately ordered to strengthen the security around the maze and sent out people to gather intelligence on these major mazes. Sure enough, in the following days, envoys from the swamp, wanderers, and dream mazes came to visit. They all brought gifts for important matters. The dream maze sent these 2 young fallen elves, which looked like they were intended to be planted in the Garrow maze as spies. The swamp maze sent several species similar to slimes, hoping to reach a non-aggression agreement with the Garrow maze. Lastly, the wanderers may sent several combative centaurs. Although they all sent gifts, Jinjenu still preferred the simple and direct gifts from the goblin maze. So far, except for the undead mace and bowstone mace, all other mazes had sent representatives. Suddenly, the control system popped up an alert warning of foreign species infiltrating the maze. Jinjenu immediately stood up slowly without showing any sign. At this moment, there were 24 seconds left until the maze upgrade was complete. Soon, with the system's prompt, the maze successfully upgraded to level 2. While activating his scout's eye in a flash, his arm transformed into tentacles and shot out, pulling out a viscous creature with several eyes from a crevice in the rock wall. Looking at the disgusting creature before him, Jinjenu immediately became furious. This should be a spy sent by the Bow Monarch to monitor them. Such a provocative act was tantamount to a declaration of war in Jinjenius' eyes. Unexpectedly, as soon as he finished speaking, Jinjenius received a message from Duomi, informing him that the Taoist clan possessed collective intelligence. Everything they saw and heard would be directly transmitted to the Bow Monarch. This made Jinjenu realize his mistake. He had just declared war on them, which was a bit hasty. He suddenly felt awkward and unable to back down. However, Duomi suggested why not follow through and directly attack to destroy the bommies. Jinjenu was immediately startled by Duomi's proposal. He wondered how Duomi had become so while without him noticing. At this moment, Duomi also revealed his plan in full. Jinjenu's face immediately turned grim, and he began an impromptu performance for that puddle of slime. He loudly declared that he had already grasped the fatal weakness of the Bow Monarch, as well as the location of the maze. In a week, he would personally lead the Mage Corps to conquer the Gluttony Maze. By then, the Gluttony Maze would be frozen by the ice and snow summoned by the Garrow mages. He also expressed his anticipation to see the slimy Gluttony Monarch frozen into an ice sculpture. This emotional performance immediately frightened the Bow Monarch out of his wits. Just as he was panicking and despairing, Jinjenius suddenly changed his tone, stating that things hadn't reached the point of no return yet. As long as he came to apologize in person before next week, there might still be room for negotiation. After saying this, he crushed the slimy creature in his hand. If there had been 2 more, the outcome would have been unimaginable. They all forced a smile and looked at each other, laughing. At least they had shown off in front of their rich employer. Maybe there would be extra rewards after the mission was completed. Eager, he stood up and said open. The space in front of him cracked open like a mirror. On the Bow Monarch side, there was a deathly silence, but it seemed that several puddles of slime gathered around as if discussing something. Soon, several more days passed. On this day, Dumi came to report in panic that the Bow Monarch had arrived outside the Garrow maze. Unexpectedly, Jinjenu stood up and told Dumi to hide behind him. As Duomi was confused, Jinjenius slowly walked to the entrance of the hall and angrily shouted at the Bow Monarch. "I see you're not here to apologize, so I guess you must be here to die." As Jinjenius' words fell, a huge mass of slime covered in eyeballs appeared. How this monster with 800 eyes all over its body was tricked by humans. Time rewound to a few minutes earlier. Following Jinjenu's angry shout, a viscous creature covered in wild boar eyes suddenly appeared. The Bow Monarch's unreasonable behavior clearly indicated his attitude for this visit. Since the other party had already shown hostility by coming here, Jinjenu no longer held back. With a wave of his hand, the mages who had been lying in wait for a long time appeared and cast ice magic. The temperature in the hall suddenly dropped. Several giant snakes formed from ice suddenly rose from the ground, facing off against the Bow Monarch. During this time, Jinjeniu was quietly observing from the side. He couldn't help but feel doubtful because he could sense that the bow monarch didn't seem to fear ice magic. In fact, he became more excited upon seeing the ice snakes. His behavior seemed more like he was eager to launch an attack. Could it be that the bow monarch's weakness wasn't as Duomi had described? At this moment, he couldn't help but feel regretful that his bluff had attracted such a formidable opponent. As he gradually entered the maze, one of the prompt messages that appeared on the control interface caught his interest. But there was no time to dwell on it now, as the maze core was right behind him. He immediately made a decision in his heart, choosing to trust Duomi and go all out. He ordered the mage core to increase their magic output. At the same time, he activated his parasitic form and triggered the hardening skill. Feeling it wasn't enough, he immediately had the mages enchant his tentacles, turning them into hard, sharp ice blade forms. Meanwhile, the bow monarch also made a move. His originally spread-out body suddenly contracted into a ball, as if preparing to tighten his core and gather strength. It seemed they had encountered a tough opponent today. Jin Zhenyu changed his strategy and ordered the mage core to jointly cast combination skills, intending to deliver a fatal blow to the gluttony monarch. Just as the magical attack was about to land on the gluttony monarch, in a flash, the gluttony monarch, who had transformed into a human-like form, slammed his knees onto the ground with fury. The force instantly created a shockwave on the ground. Countless scattered flying debris shot towards the ice snakes rushing at him. In an instant, the debris shattered the ice snakes into pieces, but this was accompanied by a sorry, "Please forgive me for not apologizing. What the hell was this?" Jin Zhenyu was shocked and startled, his face full of disbelief. Looking at the guy in front of him, who was now in tears and continuously apologizing, this sudden turn of events left Jin Zhenyu for a few seconds before he could recover. This scene was too awkward. It felt like he had led a group of adults to bully a small child to tears. After listening to the Bow Monarch's explanation, Jin Zhenyu roughly understood the situation. He was indeed the Bow Monarch named User. After receiving Jin Zhenyu's threat, he immediately rushed over to apologize. It was that after the maze upgraded to level 2, the Garer nest was unlocked. Eagerly walking in to inspect the room, he saw several straw-lined compartments on the walls, but the compartments were empty. Somehow, he had misunderstood and thought he was invited into the hall by Duomi. Unexpectedly, Jin Zhenyu started shouting threats at him as soon as he arrived, scaring him out of his wits. Although he immediately begged for mercy and apologized in his panic. He forgot that in his slime form he had no vocal cords, so all the apologies just now were actually only in his mind. When he wanted to curl up and escape, the entire corridor had already been frozen by magic. Luckily, in that life or death moment, he transformed into human form and shouted out that apology. Hearing this, Jin Zhenyu was still skeptical. He questioned him about how he would explain sending both soldiers to monitor the Garo maze. Unexpectedly, this incident was even more of a misunderstanding. The Bow Monarch's original intention was indeed to congratulate the Garo Lord on becoming a noble, but he had never had experience in gift-giving and had never interacted with other mazes before. So he ordered the Bow soldiers to first go and find out Jin Zhenyu's preferences, who would have thought it would backfire and almost bring him mortal danger. This bizarre explanation left Jin Zhenyu speechless. This kid in front of him was simply a shut-in who knew nothing about the world. He joked, "Why don't you change your title from gluttony to otaku?" Unexpectedly, the gluttony monarch didn't catch the sarcasm and actually said thank you. Then he started talking about the hardships he faced on his way here. It turned out that whenever he left the gluttony maze, he had to rely on his own energy to survive, consuming dozens of gluttony clan members from his body every minute. Jin Zhenyu was curious and confused about this. Logically, how could someone whose body was slowly dying be so calm? So filled with curiosity, he walked into the room to investigate further. Unexpectedly, after just a few steps, he heard a faint sound from behind. The Bow Monarch sadly explained that these lower-level Bow clan members actually had no self-awareness. So for this visit, he brought 1 million Bow clan members, which could sustain him for a month. If he had really been frozen by ice magic just now, this child would have been separated from life in a very short time. He was truly naive, revealing such fatal information. In fact, Jin Zhenyu was secretly relieved. He was indeed very afraid of being frozen. From the brief encounter earlier, it was clear that even if the entire Mage Corps attacked simultaneously, they couldn't freeze him in one go. During that time, he only needed to use the mobile parts of his body to hit the ground or ceiling, unleashing that overwhelming force within him to neutralize the magic and find an opportunity to attack the Maze Corps or escape. Now that the misunderstanding between both parties was cleared up, the Bow Monarch user pitifully asked Jin Genu if he could leave. However, Jin Genu was slyly trying to trick him. He immediately stated that he wouldn't accept an apology from someone who came empty-handed and showed no sincerity. Jin Genu's words instantly terrified user who wanted to explain himself but felt he shouldn't. Just as he was at a loss, Jin Genu suddenly changed his tone. He promised that if user was willing to become his first knight and serve him, he would accept the apology and forgive his mistakes. User was stunned upon hearing this, his face full of disbelief. This made Jin Genu, who thought he would need to argue further, inwardly jubilant. He began to embellish his description of the benefits of becoming a knight, saying at least he wouldn't have to worry about dying from weapons or magic. Then eerie sounds gradually arose from all around and they were closing in on him. And becoming the first knight of a noble would make him a figure admired by all. Jin Genu's manipulation was so obvious that even Duomi found it hard to watch. However, hearing this description, user became even more excited, imagining himself in armor, looking powerful and imposing. He immediately agreed, fearing Jin Genu might change his mind. And so, the two signed a master-serving contract in front of everyone. This contract required user to unconditionally protect Jin Genu and join his maze. Additionally, he had to regularly submit half of the total income from the Gluttony maze to Jin Genu in the form of gems. Meanwhile, Jin Genu didn't have to give up anything. Just like that, on the 9th underground floor, the feared Bow Monarch was tricked into becoming Jin Genu's top enforcer. At the same time, in a secret room, deep within the underground maze, black merchants from various levels were holding a standing committee meeting. However, it seemed that the black merchants responsible for levels 1, 2, and 3 were absent. It was said they were busy joining forces with the 4th level black merchant to resist human invasion. The black merchant in charge of Jin Genius level, due to Jin Genius promotion to nobility, was assigned by the organization to deliver a VIP ticket for an auction to Jin Genius. The ticket in his hand caught the attention of other level merchants. Everyone knew that the 9th level was a new maze, meaning it was the hardest to survive in. How could a human rise in such an environment? The 9th level merchant smiled without speaking, because it was he who, as per the Black Merchant Organization's request, had sold the parasite to Jin Genu. This allowed Jin Genu to use the parasite's power to establish a foothold for the Garo maze on the 9th level. However, the next second, what appeared before his eyes were 6 adorable little snakes. The Phantom Pearl system panel showed that they were summoned with the maze's upgrade. They were Garara clan members and could be dispatched to do any task within their capabilities. Looking at the ticket in his hand, he was already anticipating what interesting things Jin Genu would do with this auction. Moreover, this was the first ever auction inviting a human noble to attend. These few horned demons controlled the economic fate of the entire underground world. At the meeting, the 9th level black merchant received instructions from the organization to invite the newly promoted human king Jin Genu to attend the annual auction in a week. Unexpectedly, to complete the task, the black merchant exaggerated, claiming this would be the most grand auction ever. The auction items, he said, were all rare treasures rarely seen in the underground world. Compared to the junk he had brought before, these were on a completely different level. Moreover, over 100 people were invited to participate in the auction this time. All of them big shots who dominated the underground world. This immediately piqued Jin Genu's interest, who was initially uninterested. He was surprised that so many maze forces had survived after the recent great battle. Jin Genu was very curious to see it, but he also had concerns. After all, the Garo maze had just established itself on the 9th level, and their resources were still limited. If other mazes took advantage of his absence to attack, it would be counterproductive. To this, the black merchant assured him not to worry. He pulled out a flag from somewhere and proudly introduced it. As long as Jin Genu hung this black merchant flag when leaving the Garo maze, it would signify protection from the Black Merchant Organization. If any maze dared to start a war during this period, they would be blacklisted from trading, and the black merchants would even send troops to destroy the offending maze. Looking at these level 1 cute pets with big eyes in front of him, they seemed to be waiting for their master to assign tasks. He scratched his head, but fortunately he had played strategic online games before. Hearing this, Jin Genu was secretly shocked. Although he knew the Black Merchant Organization was powerful, he didn't expect them to be so confident. He then tentatively asked, "How can you merchants make such bold claims?" Unexpectedly, the Black Merchant's single response dispelled Jin Genu's doubts. "It may be hard for you to believe, But our black merchant organization has been operating in the underground world for hundreds of years. At this point, the user also chimed in, confirming the black merchant's words. Because in earlier years, to escape the destruction of mazes, he had once sought refuge in the auction house during times of war. It was then that the black merchant noticed the short-statured user. He was immediately startled, surprised to see this ninth-level shut-in appearing in the Garrow maze. Then he noticed the spatial rift behind user, which led directly to the bomb maze. Unable to hide his shock, he couldn't help but ask where this came from. Jinjenu decided not to conceal anything. He informed the black merchant that the Bauman Arc had become one of his knights, thus gaining the ability to open portals between the two mazes. This information was incredibly shocking. The Bow Maze being annexed by the Garrow Maze would form a powerful force in the ninth-level world, inevitably alerting surrounding mazes. Jinjen, you didn't seem concerned, but the black merchant's words gave him an idea. He immediately opened the control system page for the Gluttony Monarch user. He could only see the level 5 Gluttony Maze under user's control, but he didn't have the authority to control the Gluttony Maze. He divided the 6 little snakes into 2 groups, 3 in each. One group was sent out to scout and understand the maze's surroundings. This result disappointed him somewhat. It seemed the master-serving contract only bound user as an individual, but as the black merchant recovered from the shock of this information, he once again steered the conversation back to the upcoming auction. He stated that if Jin Jinyu was willing to attend the auction with his VIP ticket, he would enjoy a private undisturbed box. Inside, he could enjoy free food suitable for noble tastes, and there would be a dedicated person to assist with auction matters. Hearing this, Jin Jinyu had already decided to attend in his heart. But then, thinking of his biggest potential threat at the moment, he asked the black merchant if the undead monarch would also be invited. The black merchant naturally understood Jin Jinyu's meaning, but he only said that the undead monarch attends every year, and each time he buys a few live creatures to take back for experiments. The black merchant didn't say anything more about the undead monarch's personal information. Unable to get the information he wanted, Jin Jinyu couldn't be bothered to deal with the black merchant further. He accepted the ticket and said he would attend as scheduled. Considering it was Jin Jinyu's first time attending, the black merchant didn't forget to explain how to use the ticket before leaving. He said that simply tearing the ticket would open a portal directly to the auction. A week later, on the day of the auction, Jin Jinyu first instructed Koen Yin to hang the black merchant's flag on the gate tower, and arranged for him to strengthen patrols around the maze, watching out for beast intrusions. Since the undead monarch was also attending the auction, the only threat to them would be from beasts. Domi was also left behind to watch over the maze and ensure normal operations. The second group was arranged to work at home as laborers. They needed to dig out a storage room, but Kim Jin-woo didn't have high expectations for these little snakes. He himself took Lisa and User to the auction. He tore open the golden glowing ticket in his hand. And in an instant, they arrived at the bustling auction site. There, he noticed many maze lords who usually couldn't stand each other arguing heatedly in the stands. But it was just verbal sparring. None dared to cause trouble at the auction. The rabbit girl beside him was his dedicated personal assistant for this event. Suddenly, User called out to Jin Jinyu. Following User's direction, he looked towards a solitary figure in the stands. Is that the undead monarch? That's right, I heard that guy emits the smell of rotting corpses. So you see, no one wants to sit near him, just as User was about to continue criticizing the undead monarch. The auction began at that moment. A horn auctioneer walked out from the back and, as usual, said a few meaningless words to set the mood, building up the atmosphere. Then he immediately presented the first item of the auction. As the auctioneer lifted the curtain, the item was revealed. However, Jin Jinyu, who had been indifferent, first looked incredulous when he saw the item on stage. Unexpectedly, the next second his aura became turbulent, extremely chaotic. Meanwhile, on stage, the auctioneer, in order to fetch a high price, was vividly describing the item. After all, judging by their appearance, they all looked short and stubby. The item in the cage appeared to be a humanoid creature, a human child, actually being bought and sold like livestock by the underground maze monsters. Decades ago, humans, armed with firearms, engaged in a prolonged war with the monsters of the underground maze, and maze babies were children born to humans who had entered and fought in the underground maze. The girl in the cage before them was born in the underground maze. After being captured by monsters, maze babies were sent to the auction house to be sold. But as this item appeared, the monsters below booed, seemingly uninterested in bidding on this item. Seeing this, the auctioneer on stage wasn't worried at all because he knew that for these monsters living in the shallow layers of the maze, humans weren't rare. So his potential clients were those monsters living in the deep layers who had never seen humans before, or maze nobles who like to use humans as servants. For this reason, the auctioneer continued to eloquently introduce the item on stage. Finally, he stated that because this maze baby couldn't speak, bidding would start at 0. As soon as he finished speaking, the atmosphere in the venue immediately ignited. After all, not only humans like to snag bargains, monsters do too. Soon, the price was raised to 200 gems. Meanwhile, in one of the VIP boxes on the second floor, if it weren't for Lisa and users' persuasion, the enraging Jinyu would have likely rushed onto the stage to save the person. This was the Black Merchant's territory. Moreover, there were at least dozens of terrifyingly powerful maze lords present. Starting a fight here would be like eggs smashing against rocks. But Jean Geniu still couldn't let it go. Pointing at the girl on stage, he asked. However, Kim Jin-woo secretly clenched his fists nervously. He hurriedly reminded everyone to drop their bags and leave immediately to return to the surface. But these people ignored him and continued boasting about their bravery. Who would have thought the three snakes at home worked exceptionally hard? They dug out the storage room in just 1 hour. Lisa had once said she wanted to avenge her people because they all died in the undead monarch's live experiments. However, the girl on stage now is my kind. Yet you're advising me to stand by and do nothing. These words left Lisa stunned. She turned her head away in shame. At this moment, the rabbit girl who had been silently watching everything spoke up, enlightening them. They immediately realized that participating in the bidding might actually be a good idea. But unexpectedly, after several rounds of bidding, the price had already climbed to 1,200 gems. As expected, the highest bid came from the undead monarch. Jean Geniu immediately called out 1,300 gems, joining the bidding. Because this bid came from a noble box on the second floor, it immediately caught the auctioneer's attention. He immediately used an inflammatory tone to tease the undead monarch in the stands about his bad luck, saying that a highly respected noble had also set his eyes on this maze baby. The undead monarch seemed to be provoked by his words. He imperiously extended his 5 withered fingers, raising the price to 1,500 gems. This unyielding gesture made the spectating monsters think he must have gone mad from lying in his coffin for too long. He dared to challenge those. Noble's favorite items, he's already undead, looks like he wants to die again. As everyone had guessed, a terrifying and violent pressure suddenly erupted from the noble's box, sweeping across the entire venue, instantly frightening the onlookers into a cold sweat. Soon the snake sent out the scout also returned. But why was there only one left? He immediately felt uneasy. Was it that dangerous outside the secret room? However, this pressure quickly dissipated without a trace. It seemed its appearance was only a warning to those who dared to disrespect noble authority from the now calm second-floor box. A bid of 1,600 gems was calmly called out. The auctioneer immediately became excited and started the chant again. During this, whether intentionally or not, he reminded that once an item is sold, they are not responsible for what happens after the auction. At this time, the undead monarch was trembling all over, unclear if he was scared or frustrated, and did not continue to raise the bid. Finally, after chanting 3 times at 1,600 gems, Jean Genu successfully won the bid. Meanwhile, Jean Genu's box was in a state of disarray to create the intimidating pressure that had just swept the venue. Jean Genu and user had combined their full strength, nearly demolishing the box. Of course, the most exasperated was the rabbit girl. She had already decided to charge Jean Genu extra for services after checking out. Unexpectedly, Jean Genu presented her with another challenge. He wanted to see the girl immediately. To this, the rabbit girl said she couldn't help. At the earliest, they would have to wait until the week-long auction ended before they could take away the purchased items. But she could use her authority to allow Jean Genu to privately view the item. After today's auction ended, seeing this, Jean Genu had no choice but to wait patiently. The following auction items were truly some rare objects. There were treasures hoarded by elves during their decline, some velvet gems with special abilities and luxury items. There were even firearms left behind by humans in the underground maze. The final headline item was even more extraordinary. It was actually a vampire. Due to their rarity, vampires have always been controlled by nobles in the deep underground. This vampire was being auctioned because its true blood was extremely diluted. Did the other 2 die outside? With doubts, he quickly ran forward to question the snake. Even so, this auction item came with a special additional condition. That is, if the buyer is not approved by this vampire, it means the transaction is invalid. The auction house would provide a full refund and take back the item, then put it up for auction again the next day. This was because the vampire's original owner was a noble that even the auction house didn't want to offend, and they had set this special condition for his item. As soon as this additional condition was announced, it immediately caused dissatisfaction among the monsters below. They condemned the auction house for proposing unreasonable additional conditions. But the auctioneer subtly pointed out that this item was sent by a noble from the deepest layer of the underground maze. If anyone had complaints, they could direct them with the black merchants, but it wouldn't be good if their actions offended the nobles. Upon hearing this, the audience below immediately became subdued, sitting up straight and behaving like obedient babies. The appearance of the vampire reminded Jean Genu of a past event. He described to Lisa how he had once encountered a group of creatures in the deep maze that would pounce on people and suck their blood. But why do they look different from the vampire on stage? Lisa, being a well-informed mercenary, immediately guessed that what Jean Genu encountered then should have been ordinary undead. Those undead were mostly creatures without self-awareness. The vampire on stage was far superior to the undead. It was said that vampires could even grant their masters eternal life, so the nobles in the deep underground were eager for vampires. It turned out that because they had collected too many spoils during the scouting, the other two snakes stayed behind to guard the loot. There was such a good thing, looking at the little snake in front of him again, it seemed adorable no matter how he looked at it. After hearing Lisa's explanation, Jean Genu remained uninterested. Firstly, he had just heard that this vampire's true blood had been diluted, probably no longer possessing the ability to grant immortality to its master. Secondly, he didn't lack heroes around him now, so he once again became a mere spectator. Of course, many monsters didn't think like him. After all, who could resist the temptation of immortality? Even though the vampire's true blood was diluted, many monsters were still willing to buy it and give it a try. Soon, the vampire on stage was sold for 23,000 gems. However, a dramatic scene unfolded. The vampire looked down on the buyer and waved its hand, refusing to become their servant. Unexpectedly, the buyer's identity was not simple either, being the ruler of the 6th layer of the maze. After being unreasonably rejected, his face immediately fell. He raised his hand and quickly formed an energy ball about to throw it. Who would have thought the auctioneer's movement was faster? With a wave of his hand, a terrifying flame, event engulfed and burned the 6th layer buff. No one could have imagined that even a mere auctioneer from the Black Merchant Organization would have such harmful power. The ruler burned to ashes, left behind only this special gem. This immediately delighted the auctioneer, who announced on the spot that this gem would be part of tomorrow's auction. Several hours later, Jean Genu was finally led to the room where the girl was held. This was their first meeting. To find out what happens next, please stay tuned. Everyone at the monster auction, the man spent a fortune to buy a girl who couldn't speak. At this moment, the little snake immediately handed over a map. Kim Jinwoo opened the map and couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. Afterwards, accompanied by the rabbit girl, he came to the room where the girl was held. The moment the door opened in the light from the corridor, Jean Jinwoo saw a small figure curled up in the darkness. To avoid startling her, Jean Jinwoo quickly crouched down. Then, using the gentlest tone possible, he asked for the girl's name. The girl just stared at him blankly, not saying a word. Seeing this, Jean Jinwoo asked again in a soft voice which maze she came from and which maze lord she served. The girl remained silent. Her eyes were looking at him, but her gaze was unfocused. After pondering for a moment, Jean Genius sternly told the girl in a commanding tone that he was her new master, and she must serve him from now on. Sure enough, as soon as he finished speaking, the girl first nodded, then slowly knelt down. This made Jean Genius' heart sink. It seemed the girl's condition was far worse than he had imagined. She must have endured long-term torture, being broken down into a puppet without any thoughts of her own. He had originally planned to take the girl back to the Garo maze to be cared for by Duomi. Of course, Jean Jinwoo had also considered taking her back to the human world, but since the girl couldn't speak and had no self-awareness, she could easily be abused or abandoned by those families who only wanted to scam adoption subsidies. Jean Jinwoo immediately decided to keep the girl by his side and take care of her personally. Then, using a commanding tone again, he instructed the girl to stay put in the room. He would come back to get her in a week. The little snakes had thoroughly investigated the surroundings of the secret room. This would bring great convenience for future development. Jean Genu then walked out of the room with a gloomy face and immediately scolded the rabbit girl, condemning the black merchant organization for providing unsatisfactory service. He demanded that they provide a room with a better environment for the girl, as well as ample food and to heal the girl's injuries. However, his demand seemed unreasonable in the rabbit girl's eyes. There was no need to go to such lengths for a maze baby. Unexpectedly, his words touched Jean Genu's soft spot. He turned back and sternly rebuked the rabbit girl to take back what she just said because he was also a maze baby. At this moment, the parasitic mode uncontrollably spread across his entire body, ready for battle. The rabbit girl then realized she had misspoken. She immediately apologized and said she would do her best to arrange everything according to his requirements. This finally calmed Jean Genius' anger, but he was also worried that the rabbit girl might not follow through afterwards, so he hinted at her before leaving. He told her to take good care of the girl, as he would come to check on her regularly. In the blink of an eye, Jean Genu had already spent 7 days at the auction house. Apart from attending the auction on the first day, he spent most of his time in his room. Fortunately, the food and accommodation provided by the Black Merchant Organization were excellent, making their stay very comfortable and pleasant. During his free time, Jean Genu learned a lot about the Jean Ling people through casual conversations with Lisa. It turned out that after the fall of the Jean Ling clan, Lisa gathered the remaining clan members and formed a mercenary guild. Soon, they gained a reputation in the underground world due to the Jean Ling's formidable combat skills. This also caught the attention of the undead lord. This guy was obsessed with conducting crazy live experiments on various creatures. On the other side, the little snake had already dumped out all the spoils it brought back, but it greatly disappointed Kim Jin-woo. And elves themselves were delicate and rare species, so he set traps to capture elves. Lisa was the only elf who escaped the trap. Therefore, she had been wanting to avenge her people for years, but she also knew that it was impossible to do so with just one person's strength. So she attached herself to the dragon maze, waiting for an opportunity to instigate a war between the Flood Dragon King and the Undead Lord. After understanding the whole story, Jean Geniu also stated that he would keep his promise to help her take revenge. Hearing this, Lisa was immediately grateful. In fact, even without Lisa's situation, just based on the Undead Lord's indiscriminate killing, Jean Geniu wouldn't let him off. Afterwards, Jean Geniu asked Lu Su about the girl's condition. Lu Su immediately pretended to exert effort, sharing the perspective through the time-reporting clone left with the girl. Sharing the view, he could see that the girl was still kneeling in the corner with a blank expression just like before. Even when food was brought to her, she remained motionless. Only when given orders in a commanding tone would she respond. Hearing this, Jean Genu could only helplessly scratch his head. At least after today, they could head back. At this moment, the room's intercom sounded. It was a message from the Black Merchant Organization asking all guests to gather at the auction venue. Probably for some kind of closing ceremony, so they went to the auction venue with a bored attitude. Judging from the appearance and condition, they were all broken and rusty miscellaneous items and weapons. Arriving at the auction site again, they saw many more good items, but Jean Geniu only brought a total of 8,000 jams, which was far too little. Because as long as it was a good item, the price would quickly climb to over 10,000 jams. This was also why he had been staying in his room for the past few days. But seeing that today's final headline item was still that female vampire, Jean Genu couldn't help but be curious and ask the rabbit girl. Only then did he learn that the female vampire had been constantly bought by buyers at high prices these past few days, but she kept refusing to become their servant. It felt like the female vampire was deliberately going on stage to mock these bidders. At this time, the auctioneer was still awkwardly and enthusiastically introducing the female vampire. The audience below immediately listened. The scene was both bizarre and amusing, but this time there seemed to be a change. The female vampire concentrated, suddenly breaking free from her shackles. Then a blood mist exploded out of nowhere, enveloping her. When the blood mist dissipated, out walked a woman with a head full of golden wavy hair. This charming appearance with her face half hidden was truly both desirable and sweet. The auctioneer then jumped out from the side, announcing that this time the female vampire would choose her own master. As long as one was chosen, the price didn't matter. It would even be fine if they didn't pay. As soon as the words were spoken, the female vampire eagerly flapped her wings and took flight. Following her flight direction, the spectators in the stands let out a gasp of surprise. The vampire's destination was precisely the VIP box that had earlier emitted a terrifying aura. They all look like antiques from the era of the Great Intermen Fist War. However, based on these items, it could be deduced that if they could see the vampire's expression now, they would be even more shocked. The vampire's cheeks were flushed with excitement, and saliva was uncontrollably dripping from her mouth. She seemed to be murmuring so sweet under her breath. The woman appeared in front of the glass, dressed up elegantly, but only to clean the glass. And she was drooling while wiping. This scene left Jean Genu a bit confused. In all his life, he had never seen a woman drooling over him like this, bewildered. He asked Lisa beside him if this vampire might have some kind of illness. Lisa also looked embarrassed, hesitantly agreeing with this view. The auctioneer on stage also realized that the vampire had made her choice. He immediately announced this result to the entire audience. The ghosts and the stands wore expressions of disdain as if they had guessed there was a fix all along. The precious vampire must have already been promised to a nobleman. Yet the auction house had put on this charade for a whole week. This made the auctioneer gesture for everyone to be quiet. Now came the part where the buyer would set the price. As agreed earlier, as long as the vampire chose the buyer, no matter what price the buyer offered, the deal would be made. The vampire also timely displayed her charming figure in front of the mirror, hoping the nobleman behind it would see and offer a good price. The location of his secret room should be in a relatively remote part of the underground maze. Otherwise, these items would have been picked up long ago. Suddenly, a few shiny objects caught Kim Jin-woo's attention. However, a bit of one low-grade gem came from the box, causing the vampire to freeze on the spot. The ghosts in the stands were in an uproar. The vampire, hailed as a treasure of the underground maze, was about to be sold for the price of one low-grade gem. The auctioneer couldn't believe such a bit either. He immediately stepped in to calm the situation, telling the ghosts not to jump to conclusions. Perhaps the noble was referring to a top-grade velvet gem. But as soon as he said this, the vampire immediately contradicted him, confirming it was indeed a bit of one low-grade gem. Meanwhile, Lisa seemed to have anticipated such an awkward situation, but she hadn't expected Jean Genu to make such a low bid. Feeling the gaze of the entire audience, Jean Genu maintained a calm and indifferent demeanor. In his view, since the rules allowed buyers to bid any price, only a fool would offer a high price. Besides, he had zero interest in this vampire. With no further response from the VIP box, the auctioneer had no choice but to reluctantly announce that the vampire was sold for one low-grade gem. As for the vampire, although somewhat frustrated at being sold for such a low price, she didn't seem to mind. Instead, she kept urging the auctioneer to hurry up. She was eager to meet her new master. Seeing this, the auctioneer had no choice but to wrap up, declaring the auction successfully concluded. Soon after, a 9th-level black merchant led these two auction items to Jean Genu. Unexpectedly, as soon as they met, Jean Genu went straight to the point. He asked who was behind all this and what their purpose was. Suddenly, several monster roars made Kim Jin-woo's pupils constrict. The gunshots must have attracted the monsters. The sound seemed far away. If they escaped to the exit now, they might still make it. He pounced over in a flash and started rummaging. It turned out to be 3 velvet gemstones, although 2 of them were very small. Faced with this inquiry, the black merchant was momentarily taken aback, but quickly regained composure, continuing to play dumb as usual. Seeing this, Jean Genu didn't mince words. He immediately challenged, saying he first beat up a neighbor who came looking for trouble, then was appointed as a baron, becoming a noble. After that, he received their invitation to attend the auction, and here they're forcing this precious vampire soul on him. He believed there couldn't be anything more bizarre than this. Hearing this, the black merchant told Jean Genu not to overthink it. Perhaps good luck was also a manifestation of strength. He shouldn't dwell on it and should just enjoy the rewards he had received. Jean Genu didn't believe this nonsense, but he knew he wouldn't get any more information. At this point, the black merchant changed the subject, stating that this vampire would indeed require him to pay a certain price, only because her original owner liked him so much. So if anything were to happen to the vampire, the anger might be directed at Jean Genu. These words immediately startled Jean Genu. He thought he had gone a great deal, but it turned out he had picked up a troublesome grandmother figure. Since the original owner liked him so much, it would be best to send her back, he said as he turned to leave. Now it was the black merchant and the vampire's turn to be confused. The vampire's face immediately turned purple with anger. She shouted at Jean Genu, berating him for not recognizing her value. Didn't he know that having her by his side was every nobleman's dream in the underground world? Jean Genu showed no mercy at this point. In his eyes, the human girl standing in the corner was far more precious than the vampire. Seeing his firm resolve, the vampire sighed helplessly. She understood that her mysterious background made Jean January, so she decided to tell him the truth, hoping he would change his mind. Seeing his inexperienced look, the little snake indicated that they had seen many such stones along the way. This immediately made Kim Jin-woo smell money. Her name was Angela, and her former master was the Iron Giant, Count Tori, from the 11th floor of the underground maze. As for why she was being sold, the reason was quite startling. As everyone knows, vampires formed contracts with their masters through blood, but Count Tori's blood was steel, so it was quite awkward, wasn't it? As a result, the vampire had been starting for months. After explaining, she looked at Jean Genu pitifully, drooling. Unexpectedly, it was such a ridiculous reason. She admitted that she had planned to find a new master at the auction as a vampire, but those powerful nobles were all blood monsters. Their blood didn't smell as sweet as Jean Genu's. She emphasized that she meant no harm, she was just too hungry. With that, she pounced on Jean Genu without hesitation. This predatory behavior truly frightened Jean Genu. The more Jean Genu resisted, the more excited she seemed to become.